So I'm back again reading The Vein of Gold, A Journey to Your Creative Heart by Julia Cameron. There's like a little bit of glare on one of my paintings up there because of the frame, so I hope that's not too distracting. But anyways, I'm starting on page 43 and we're in the section The Kingdom of Story and the narrative timeline. According to the Hopi Spider Woman, sang the world into existence, a word at a time. According to the New Testament book of John, in the beginning was the Word. Ethiopians believe God created both the world and himself by saving his own name, by saying his own name. The Egyptian god Thoth created the world through language. Indians believe the same thing. Nada Brahma, the world is sound. Australian Aboriginals believe that the world came into existence when it was named and sung by the ancients. One word, one note, one thing at a time. As Chatwin writes in songlines, each ancestor opened his mouth and called out, I am snake, cockatoo, honey ant. The ancients sang their way all over the world. They sang the rivers and the ranges, salt pans and sand dunes. They wrapped the whole world in a web of song. And at last, when the earth was sung, they felt tired. As this brief scan demonstrates, we would be hard pressed to find a spiritual tradition that does not believe in the creative power of the word. Is it any wonder, if the word is so powerful, it can create all we see about us, that it can also have an enormous impact on the creation of our own self-image? Hardly. When we realize that our word-shaped self-image generates and selects our life experience, we begin to realize the importance of story. The way we describe our lives and understand them is ultimately and inextricably connected to the way we live them, writes Mandy Aftel. In undertaking our creative pilgrimage and seeking our vein of gold, we therefore begin with the kingdom of story. The narrative timeline. Though the road to authentic art is through the self, more specifically, it lies through the heart, not the head. Your loves, your hates, your scars, glories, fears, losses, triumphs. Your heart is the heart of the matter. Heart is where the art is. We often talk about creative self-expression without realizing that the creative flows from the self into expression. If our self is still hidden from our view, invisible and inaudible to us due to its being cloaked in the interpretations of others, we may quite naturally fear we have nothing to say. In order to be really creative, or so we believe. Sorry, let me turn my phone on silent. Okay. I can't find my place. Okay, let's get started again. Let me see. I'm just going to start at the beginning of that paragraph again. My bad, guys. We often talk about creative self-expression without realizing that the creative flows from the self into expression. If our self is still hidden from our view, invisible and inaudible to us due to its being cloaked in the interpretations of others, we may quite naturally fear we have nothing to say. In order to be really creative, or so we believe, we should have traveled around the world, lived in Paris, been arrested in Morocco, perhaps shot drugs or enemy soldiers. In order to be a real artist, in short, we're afraid that we're boring, not colorful enough, too ordinary. Nonsense. Your own life is full of great stuff. You will find out which stuff as we go. You will write your life and write it The point of writing a narrative of your life is to make the narrative truly of your life. Writing down the facts and your reaction to them will help you to begin clarifying your version of you. My life story, as told to me, is that I was born on a snowy, crystalline winter day, my mother's favorite kind. That is not how I would begin. What I remember begins when I was a toddler. I am wriggling under a fence to pick wildflowers among some dangerous neighborhood cows. The difference in the two beginnings is important. In the first, my mother is the storyteller. I am her Julie, another jewel in her crown of 7 children. My mother's version of life emphasizes her love of beauty, order, serenity, perfection, a crystalline winter day. In my version, life is a messier, warmer, full of adventure and delight. In my version, risk is tied to reward. Risk the wild dairy cows, reap the wildflowers. In other words, my mother's memory and my own center on differing chords, each expressing the melodies of our own personalities. My mother was a melodic harp. Myself, I followed the piper, mischief and merriment. The tendrils of earthly delight enticed me. It is no coincidence that the Pied Piper and Peter Pan figured large in my childhood imagination. My mother's favorite fairy tale was the Snow Queen. Her dreams and imagination differed from my own. My mother told another story about me. It centered on her reading Alice in Wonderland to me. I loved the book and evidently thought I'd love the experience even more. Naturally, when I spotted some wild mushrooms, I couldn't wait to get my teeth into them. I remember being rushed to the hospital. I remember the nice red-haired nurse and the experience of having my stomach pumped. My mother remembered my scaring her to death. In my mother's account, this proved I was a wild and unpredictable and even dangerous child. When I remember this episode, I don't remember the terror. What I remember is spotting those mushrooms and feeling intense curiosity. Would eating a mushroom really make me smaller? While my mother yearned for serenity and order in a house with 7 children, I craved adventure and expansion. I wasn't trying to thwart my mother. She wasn't trying to wet blanket me. Our needs, personalities, and spiritual agendas differed. For the sake of love and household harmony, we worked to accommodate each other. This is true of many of us. Too often we take on the coloration of parental dreams without realizing they have shaded our own. In this way, a pharmacist who is an unfiltered doctor may see a surgeon in his son. Conversely, the mother who suppressed her acting gifts may turn an unconsciously blind eye to the dazzling actress trying to emerge in her daughter. I want to be clear that often it is not that we are consciously, willfully molded into false selves. We are merely shaped into selves that others find more acceptable or comprehensible. Let me share yet another story gleefully told and retold by my family, an example again of my craziness. I am telling as many stories as I am to show how persuasively the official versions of ourselves may be built and why it is so hard at first to disbelieve them. I was 5 years old when I walked out the back door onto our flagstone patio and found a great green tomato worm oozing greenish blood, severed into 2 separate wriggling parts. My mother's gardening hoe had dealt the blow. I took one look, raced into the house, emerged in a wink with a box of Band-Aids, and taped that worm together again. When it crawled off in 2 directions, you cried and cried, the story goes. Again, the story told my family I was crazy. That's one interpretation until I began working with the tools you will use in this book. I tended to accept this interpretation. Working with my story myself, I found another. Now, this story tells me I am a healer by nature. It is my belief that the stories we choose to tell and cherish about ourselves are the true stories, the roadmap to the real lantern hearted self. Until we do the work of excavating, claiming, and unknowing our own life stories, we run the very real risk of seeing ourselves, describing ourselves, and prescribing ourselves as others see fit. We go along with their plot lines for what is our life story. This is both dangerous and damaging. How often have you known someone to accept limitations to your eye are illusory? How cheered are you when someone, be it Rocky or your own cousin, has the clarity and courage to become larger than their circumstances would suggest? We must learn to deconstruct the negative storylines that hamper our growth. One woman I know had spent a life feeling she was Cinderella, working with her narrative timeline. She suddenly realized that her own myth was far closer to that of the ugly duckling. She was not the shunned sister, she was the unrecognized swan. This click of recognition led to stop waiting for Prince Charming and begin instead to seek the company of swans. It was there that Prince Charming found her. But Julia, I'm often asked, what if I'm not really creative? What if I get unblocked and I'm dull? That is one question, but I'm no longer sure it is the right one. I think the real question is, what if I have gifts and abilities and in this lifetime I never find the courage to use them? That is the real question, the real tragedy. But what if the real me is some mousy milquetoast? What if the real you is fascinating and you just don't trust it? And so we start. We start where we must start, at the beginning. We write autobiographies not as an art form, but in order to mine them further for detail that will serve us in any art form we choose. We want access to our lives as material. Our vulnerability can feel excruciating. Even reliving our vulnerability at a remove of 30 years can feel excruciating. This is why it is worth noting that in reviewing our story, we have the chance to rewrite it as well. Let me give a specific example. When Carolyn was 18 and a newcomer at college, she was nominated for Homecoming Queen. At the time, she took it as a cruel joke. A wallflower, member of a large family filled with pretty sisters, the resident brain, Carolyn Egghead, at her high school. She went off to college unprepared for the fact that she was just as pretty as her vivacious sisters, and that as an anonymous freshman at her new college, no one knew her as an egghead to make fun of her on that count either. They were taking her at face value. Writing her narrative timeline, Carolyn came to the homecoming nomination and found herself awash with conflicting emotions, grief, pride, anger. I wanted to call my mother and say, "Why didn't you ever tell me I was pretty? I'd have liked being pretty." Instead, Carolyn found herself always awkwardly at odds with men and their motives. My self-image was Carolyn Egghead. Imagine my shock when a man made a pass at me. I thought it was done out of pity. The pity was that Carolyn did not get to enjoy her prettiness. When men expressed sexual interest, it came at her from left field, startling her and throwing her off base. Working with her timeline, Carolyn came to the belated but nonetheless delightful realization that she had always been pretty, as well as smart. Since she had always envied pretty girls, thinking of herself as a sort of egghead duckling, She felt considerable shift in her self-perception. Writing our stories, cause and effect very often reveal themselves in unexpected ways. For years, Rose had been ashamed of a period in her early 20s when she had suddenly and inexplicably turned promiscuous, sleeping with a half dozen of her male friends. It wasn't a case of my sleeping with people I didn't know. It was a case of my sleeping with people I knew all too well. I was lucky that any of my friendships survived, much less me. Writing her narrative timeline, Rose made a series of unexpected connections. Oh, my parents' marriage ended and my friend overdosed, and that's why I went around the bend. I'm not so crazy. For the first time, her promiscuous period was comprehensible to her. For the first time, she felt compassion for her younger self instead of shame. And what comfort and security, not sex, that she had been seeking. Hence, friends and not strangers. But they all had been so young, confused, and hormonally driven. Realizations like this may tempt you to pause, poised on the point of your newest insight. Don't pause. Insights like these, while personally wonderful, are a side issue. They are very nice, but they are not the point. The point of all this is a creative recovery. That means we must recover a lot of territory. So keep your hand moving. Think of your narrative timeline like driving coast to coast. If you pause at every scenic spot, you won't get west of Pennsylvania. And you can always go back there later if you want, which is exactly what we will be doing with a later tool called Cups. It is crucial in writing your narrative timeline to keep on moving, write quickly and without editing. This is not an essay or a grammar lesson. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is therapeutic, but it is not therapy. Think of it instead as archaeology. You are what we are digging for. Keep it simple. This is not meant to be art. You may find it powerful, cathartic experience to write out the facts of your life. You may, on the other hand, find yourself distanced emotionally, even bored. Do not be fooled. Keep writing. Do not strain after emotion. On the other hand, if emotion overtakes you, know that however strong it is, it will pass through you like a wave. Let yourself bob on the currents of this writing without feeling you have to troll through the depths. As the old television detective Joe Friday put it, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Sometimes the facts include an important shift in perspective. Then we move to the beloved Libertyville house. Wait a minute. I didn't love it, not at first. I was lonesome there. It took me 3 years to make any friends. Do not be discouraged if at first getting it down on the page feels cold and makes you feel vulnerable. I understand. However, my experience has been that the real result of writing an autobiography is strength, the first glimmerings of compassion and self-acceptance. Writing his narrative timeline, Michael saw for the first time that his love of writing had been all but snuffed out by the hostile criticism of his high school English teacher. To his surprise, he saw that his writing had stayed in his life in many hidden forms. Letters to friends, political activism in which he wrote speeches, helping others with grant proposals. Instead of beating himself up for not writing all of those years, he realized that he had in fact always written and protected his writing from criticism by doing it anonymously. For the first time, he felt compassion for his fragile self and respect, too, for the survivor side that had kept him writing through it all. When I was teaching at Northwestern University, I came across the work of writer and teacher Carol Bile, who required that all of her short story students write an autobiography. What a great idea, I thought, assigning the same to my screenwriting student. Her reasons for this undertaking were the unearthing of a real voice, a goal I held in common with her. What emerges from the process is a capacity for work of great originality and specificity. I soon found, however, that there was another fruit of this process that was arguably of equal value. Not only does writing a narrative timeline yield material, it generates personal strength. Artists need not only their material, but also the strength to handle it. I have been assigning the narrative timelines and my variations on them cups, more on which later, ever since. Let me say at this point that I know that this tool can feel daunting. Even knowing the potential rewards, it can be hard to do the actual writing. If you get stuck or want to prime the pump before plugging in, try this. Divide a piece of notebook paper into 3 parts horizontally. Label the top third years 1 through 5, the middle is years 5 through 10, the bottom third is years 10 through 15. On additional pieces of paper, move through your life in 5-year increments up to your current age, jotting notes to answer these questions. Where did you live? Who were your major players? Any significant pets? Favorite food? Favorite game? Favorite music? Favorite friend? Favorite toys? Favorite hobbies? Favorite interests? Favorite clothes? What were your major events? What are your dominant memories? Do not be alarmed if some answers are hard to come by. This is a seeding exercise. By raising these questions, we stimulate a flow of memories. They may not emerge immediately. Be patient. Don't worry about that. You are simply priming the pump. Eventually, you will find a richer flow of images and identity. Even without formally writing on your life, the mere act of jotting notes will begin to connect the dots of a fragmented self. When I think of me between 5 and 10, I see myself hauling red wagon loads of wild violets home from the woods to our doorways. I remember young me, hands blistered from the wagon handle, lugging load after load, transplanting them to make fairy rings around the base of our oak trees. You see, my sad mother loved violets, and I believe that if I could just transplant enough heavy wagon loads, I could lighten my mother's heart. All of us have stories like this. The act of remembering them helps write our vision of ourselves, and so I urge you in your notes to be specific. Remember, at age 8, you moved away from your beloved best friend. In the official family version, the move was a great success for all of you. You got out of the city and into splendors or the splendors of suburbia, to that wonderful house where we all were so happy. Were you? Maybe you missed your friend. Maybe the rolling suburban lawn meant nothing to you after the action and adventure of the city alleys. This is your story. Remember that. Don't judge what you are noting down. If a memory comes back to you, the peculiar cowboy lamp with a buckskin fringe shade, your ranch-style bunk beds, trust that memory and jot it down. Lamp bunk beds. The smell of lilacs outside your 10-year-old self-bedroom may be the gateway to a lifelong love of flowers. To nurture yourself effectively as an adult, you may need flowers, potpourri, a house of scents as well as sensibility. On a recent teaching trip to Minnesota, I was running my morning rounds through the city streets when I spotted a lone, lovely violet peeping out through a crack at the bottom of some cement steps. Instantly, I thought of my mother, dead now for 15 years. I remembered her largest garden, the peonies, rambling roses, and the tall spears of delphium piercing blue. Beyond that, I remembered me, the sweetness of my child's hope that a wagon full of violets could make her happy. As you write, allow yourself compassion. Be sure to remember that the emphasis given to events is yours and yours alone. The loss of a pet parakeet out the window may have loomed larger to your young self than gaining a baby brother. Don't judge yourself for this. Being teased about your singing voice in 8th grade chorus may have silenced a singer's heart. Allow yourself to claim the memory at the same level it claims you. Years 1 to 5 may take 12 pages or only 2. Pace yourself gently but steadily. As a rule of thumb, narrative timelines profitably run between 5 and 25,000 words. 10 to 15,000 seems to suit a lot of people nicely. The danger in using too few words is that you may still be serving up the canned version of yourself as capsulized by family and friends. The danger in too many words, too much detail, is discouragement about finishing. We're looking for a balance between brevity and overkill, between A, I got divorced the year I was 29, and B, Sally on that Tuesday, the 3rd Tuesday of March, right after my 29th birthday, squeezed the toothpaste in the middle, foreshadowing our divorce later that year. If your memory is strong for you, trust that you are all that matters. If an incident has weight for you, then it is significant. Trust yourself in this. Each of us has special stories to tell, and the audience we require is our own loving attention. Susan, writing notes for her early 20s, wrote down the fact of her sister's accidental death. Moving on to jot down other notes, she saw that many of her favorite things had left her life along with her favorite sister. For the first time, she saw clearly how darkness had settled over life, and she saw too that it was guilt as well as grief that had shadowed her days. She and her sister had shared many joys. Grieving her sister, she packed away many of her enthusiasms, just as she had packed away her sister's clothes. Remember that insights often come to us as flashes. In doing her notes, Susan saw her life illuminated. Later, writing out her narrative timeline, as we will be doing in future weeks, a thaw came to Susan's heart. The Charles Aznavour records she and her sisters have found so riveting. Couldn't she listen to them again? Couldn't she, 20 years later, now allow herself to take the trip to Paris that she and her sisters had planned long ago? She could, and she did. She went for both of them. Just want to take a look to see. Okay, I think I'm going to keep on going. In losing her sister, Susan had lost much of herself. In claiming her past, Susan found herself present for her future. A word here. Not all of us have lives that contain events as traumatic as siblings' sudden death. Some of us enter our narrative timelines convinced we are the owners of boring stories. We believe others have lived in Technicolor while we have merely dabbled in pastels. Re-entering the lives we have considered drab, we are often surprised to find that as we really focus on them, honoring them with our attention, our very lives seem to become richer and more saturated with color and meaning. I am thinking now of my friend Laura, a kindergarten teacher who undertook her narrative timeline with the conviction her own life was simple as a children's coloring book, hackneyed as a nursery rhyme. I've been a teacher for 20 years, she told me. My life is children. I'm like Mary Poppins. Under her startled hand, Mary Poppins discovered a life rich in forgotten and misplaced passions, an abandoned gift for playing the cello, a love for dance, a zealous interest in Cretan culture, a love of Middle Eastern food, a life, in short, with at least as much spice as it had sugar. Remember, while writing is the act of saying I, it is equally true that writing is the act of saying he, she, they, and then telling it like we saw it. He hit me. He stole my boyfriend. She stole my boyfriend. They moved in next door. Practice letting yourself leave in all the interesting little hooks that spring to mind. My Aunt B, she always smelled like talcum powder and lemons. Be gentle with yourself about the vagaries of memory. The flashes that emerge may startle you. Think of them as heat lightning. You are warming to the task of meeting yourself. In tracing your narrative timeline, you are looking for landmarks, yes, but you will also find more subtle tracery of your heart's trail. What did you love? Ask yourself that about anything from clothing to college studies. The answer is another tiny nugget of your authentic self. Take the question of pets. When I was a child, my grandparents and my parents raised boxer dogs. As an adult, my heart still leaps at the sight of a boxer puppy. Poodles, beagles, German shepherds may cheer me, but a good baby boxer thrills and transports me. It is a trick of memory. I am in the backyard playing with our two boxers, Sean and Clooney. We are gamboling across the lawn. Clooney attacks Dandelion, sending puffs of snow into the air. No! Sean is skidding through snowdrifts, and then I am in my snowsuit sledding, with Sean harnessed by scarves to my red flyer sled. You may notice as you write that slowly and almost imperceptibly your emphasis is shifting as your own recollections take over. Notice that as you recall places and events, you may reconnect to a younger self and even feel the energy of that self, glad, sad, isolated, zany. At this point, let us know, as we will again and again, that the word original contains the seed word origin. I'm writing out our narrative timeline. We outline our land of origin. We strengthen our color and our unique personal frequency. By owning our life, we make it our own. By writing our narrative timelines, we give permission to the self to do, have, make, be something special. Here are a few of the ahas that students have had working with this tool. My aha after the fact was how cruel and judgmental I've been with myself about my life. My aha was my comparison towards self and family. I saw how much denial I've had about my family. They are not available to me. I saw a theme in my life between being in control and being silly. I never allowed myself to be the important one in a relationship. I don't feel ruled by my past, and it was really fun to do. I thought perhaps my real father might not have really been my father. And you know what? It does not matter. I am who I am all by myself. I let go of old grief and anger. I was actually able to look at my life a little more objectively and remember more of the good things and not dwell so much on the negative. I also began to see a thread of connection to so much unconscious behavior. Aha, a warmth from revisiting myself. I was surprised that after seemingly constant self-exploration the last 2 years, there was even more dirt to dig up. Realization that highlights and traumas had karmic overtones. How vast and varied and many lived my life has been. Also, a great mind for writing material. You will work on this task for the next 2 to 3 weeks. From our narrative timelines, we gain a sense of personal community and permission to say the unsayable, permission to think the unthinkable, permission to make the previously unmakeable art. In other words, although the narrative timeline is not in and of itself art, it is the wellspring from which our art flows. Director Martin Scorsese remembers that above his childhood bed in New York's Little Italy was painted God's all-seeing eye. This eye missed nothing of young Martin's thoughts and activities. It loomed large in his youthful imagination, so pursuing him that for a while he entered a seminary to make peace with God's demanding omniscience. Is it any coincidence that as a mature filmmaker, Scorsese makes films centering on themes of guilt and redemption? He doesn't think so. Novelist John Nichols, who lost his mother to an ultimately untimely death when he was still a toddler, forged a heartbreaking novel of an abandoned child, The Wizard of Loneliness, in his artistic reworking of that loss. My own sister Libby, a brilliant portrait painter, turned her skills to painting through the memories in order to put behind her difficult adolescence. In the process, she generated a series of autobiographical oils featuring her and her childhood mare, which remain among her best and most original work. It was also the first glimmering of the fact that she would be able to specialize in the exceedingly difficult task of combined child and animal portraiture. For all of us, by claiming our own memories, we gain access to the creative energy that they contain. Memories become a source of not only of inspiration, but of fuel. In other words, they give us not only ideas, but also the power to carry them out. Real art is made from the inside out, not the outside in. For this reason, self-disclosure must begin with the disclosure of self to self. This self-initiated self-disclosure requires privacy and attention. Those are the gifts of the narrative timeline. Okay, so the next part is all of the tasks. So the first task, filling in notes. This week, every day, work on filling in your narrative timeline notes. If you find that the act of jotting down notes moves you straight into writing, skip ahead and dive right into writing. Task 2. Post a sign on your mirror. Yes, I can do my narrative timeline. Task 3. Contact someone and commit. Call or write someone on your cluster list. Explain what it is you are undertaking and commit officially to doing it. You may wish to set up a weekly check-in with them. Task 4. Do your narrative timeline. Working with your timeline notes or simply plunging in, begin to get your life on paper. Write very fast from the top of your head, perhaps setting a clock, only allowing an hour per session, although you can do more if it is comfortable. Many people experience the timeline rushing through them. I am often asked if the timeline can be done in place of the morning pages. The answer is no, no, and no. The morning pages are a very important anchor in your present life. Do not abandon this grounding line. Think of them as a rope you have tied around your waist to keep you safe and connected no matter how deeply you travel into the mine of your past experiences. Task 5. Filling in the blanks. Please fill in the blanks on the age periods that apply to you. Do this in addition to your own work on narrative timeline notes. Years 1 through 5. As a young child, my favorite playmate was blank. What I remember about my playmate is blank. As a young child, my favorite toy was blank. I remember my favorite game was blank. We lived blank. Our house was blank. I remember liking to go blank. In my family, we had lots of blank. My brothers and sisters, blank. My pets, blank. Years 5 through 10. As a child, my favorite subject was blank. I thought my teachers were blank. My best friend was blank. I liked blank. My favorite teacher was blank. I remember blank. The teacher I hated was blank. I was praised in school for my blank. My parents seemed to feel I was blank. My own feeling is that I was blank. Years 10 through 15. As a pre-adolescent, I began blank. I loved to blank. My favorite adventure was blank. My friends were blank. Alcohol and drugs were blank. Sex was blank. My parents, blank. In my family, I was considered blank. My friends called me blank. What I did to amuse myself was blank. Years 15 through 20. As a teenager, I considered myself blank. What made me feel less isolated was blank. The friend I had fun with was blank. I experimented with blank. My job as a teacher was blank. My own sense of myself was blank. My relationship to alcohol, drugs, sex, and food was blank. My teen hangout was blank. What I did to amuse myself was blank. What my friends and I did for amusement was blank. Years 20 through 25. At college age, my self-image was blank. My closest friends were blank. What I wanted to do was blank. What I studied was blank. I found a new interest in blank. College felt to me like blank. My relationship to alcohol, drugs, sex, and food was blank. During this time, my relationship to my mother was blank. During this time, my relationship to my father, blank. The music and movies and books and other cultural enjoyments were blank. Years 25 through 30. In my 20s, I generally felt blank. My close friendships, blank. I undertook blank. I became aware or started to believe blank. I began to have trouble with blank. I got a better perspective on blank. My self-esteem, blank. My spiritual life, blank. I define myself primarily by blank. I felt my options, blank. Years 30 to 40. In my 30s, I began to feel blank. My life seemed somehow blank. I think this was because blank. My friendship seemed to blank. I found myself blank. I developed a deeper interest in blank. Hobbies, blank. My life was dominated by blank. I considered myself blank. I began to wish blank. Years 40 to 50. As I entered my 40s, I found blank. I was surprised at how blank. I yearned to just blank. I told myself blank. I discovered I could blank. My friendships now blank. I use my time blank. Increasingly, I turned to blank. I found a deeper sense of blank. The world felt blank. Years 50 to 60. Moving into my 50s, my spiritual life blank. My daily patterns blank. I made peace with blank. I felt anger at blank. I chose to blank. I began with blank. I turned to blank. I found I blank. My view of life blank. I began to actively seek blank. Years 60 to 70. At 60, I found I could blank. What surprised me was blank. I liked feeling blank. I felt liberated from blank. My regrets became blank. My clarity about blank. My sense of fair play demanded blank. I looked to blank. I found I could no longer blank. I chose to blank. Years 70 to 80 and onward. After I turned 70, my interest in blank, my focus on blank, my feeling of blank, my passion for blank, my joy in blank, my release of blank, my concern about blank, my return to blank, my acceptance of blank, my curiosity about blank. So this is the part where there's like the quotes on the side, so I'll go ahead and read those. The aim of every artist is to arrest motion, which is life, by artificial means. William Faulkner. Properly understood as a question of focus, unconditional love is the creative process. Peter Rogers. Life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forward. Niels Bohr. I think of the self that I write about as being made of words. He's been reconstructed constantly, over and over again, out of words. Charles Wright. There are only 2 or 3 human stories, and they go on repeating themselves as fiercely as if they had never happened before. Willa Cather. One writes to make a home for oneself on paper and time in others' minds. Alfred Zakin. It doesn't matter who my father was, it matters who I remember he was. Anne Sexton. Ultimately, literature is nothing but carpentry. With both, you are working with reality, a material just as hard as wood. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. However confused the scene of our life appears, however torn we may be who now do face that scene, it can be faced and we can go on to be whole. Muriel Rukeyser. We must capture our personal and idiosyncratic language so that we may speak about our personal and idiosyncratic life. Peter London. As you begin to pay attention to your own stories and what they say about you, you will enter into the exciting process of becoming, as you should be, the author of your own life, the creator of your own possibilities. Mandy Aftel. There is danger in singing someone else's song. Don G. Campbell. Oh, I like that one a lot. There is danger in singing someone else's song. Human beings ought to communicate and share all the gifts they have received from God. Meister Eckhart. The deepest secret in our heart of hearts is that we are writing because we love the world. Natalie Goldberg. You already have the precious mixture that will make you well. Use it. Rumi. Our own life is the instrument with which we experiment with truth. Thich Nhat Hanh. Especially as an artist, we have to celebrate our memories. Maynard Craighead. Regardless of our writing talent, in our daily lives, we are all ad hoc novelists. Mandy Aftel. Seeing the bigger picture involves putting everything into its larger framework, where its true meaning can be understood. Sanaya Roman. You need only claim the events of your life to make yourself yours. Florida Scott Maxwell. As we begin to become aware of the narrative patterns around which we structure our lives, we learn how to take charge, revise, refine, and even completely rewrite them. Mandy Aftel. When we look into the mirror, we see the mask. What is hidden behind the mask? Diane Merrichild. We do not learn by experience, but by our capacity for experience. Buddha. Whenever 2 people meet, there are really 6 present. There's each man as he sees himself, each as the other person sees him, and each man as he really is. William James. The quest for a story is the quest for a life. Jill Johnston. In every adult, there lurks a child, an eternal child, something that is always becoming, is never completed, and calls for unceasing care, attention, and education. That is the part of the human personality which wants to develop and become whole. C.G. Jung. The world is full of people that have stopped listening to themselves or have listened only to their neighbors to learn what they ought to do, how they ought to behave, and what the values are that they should be living for. Joseph Campbell. In a very real sense, we are the authors of our own lives. Mandy Aftel. Experience is not what happens to a man. It is what a man does with what happens to him. Aldous Huxley. Okay, and that was the end of that section. Thanks so much for reading this with me. I really, really appreciate you and this opportunity. And bye for now.